Joining me now to look at this is a management consultant and the CEO of Flame Academy and Consulting, Mr. Oji Udemeze. Thank you, Mr. Udemeze. Thank you for joining us on the show.
Always my pleasure, Jerry, here. Thank you very much.
Okay, we've seen some kind of dynamism now in oil benchmark. First, it was $57. Then we had $30 per barrel. Now we're talking about $20 per barrel. What's your view on this shifting of the benchmark?
I think the further downward review to $20 per barrel was rather hasty, in my view. Yes, we know that the oil price crashed so much that at some point it was, trading around $19, $20 per barrel. In fact, the WTI, that's the U.S. Crude oil benchmark, at some point went negative in the futures market, where producers were paying traders to take off the oil from their tanks and all of that.
So we've never seen.
We've never seen, in history,
Absolutely.
where it went negative. So the sentiment was that the COVID pandemic was going to crash the oil price to next to nothing. That a bottle of Coke might end up being, more costly than the barrel of oil. But that, hasn't happened. And with the trend now in many economies, in Europe, in the Americas, and even in Africa, where countries are beginning to now gradually and strategically and safely, ease the lockdown and get people back to life, to work, knowing that life is also as important as livelihood. So as we're beginning to see movements, around some nations, which is gradual and which is going to ramp up over time, you find that the demand for oil is coming back gradually. Vehicles are moving around, factories are running, and some planes, even though Nigeria is still locked down, in terms of international travels, but some movements are even beginning to happen. I see that even our airspace is getting a bit busier with some special approvals for people to move. So, and as planes move around, more cars are now on the road and factories are running and all of that, you can begin to see that, the demand for oil is beginning to tick up. And right now it's somewhere around $30 per barrel. And I see, even some projections being seen, we estimate that it will continue to go up as more activities continue to come out, in several economies.
There are some projections that are also saying that it's still going to be like $20.
No. I'm sure we've seen the worst of the impact of the COVID. There are several other factors that have always affected the oil price, including the fact that Russia is almost falling out with the OPEC. So the OPEC Plus system is not working as efficiently as it used to work. And Russia and Saudi Arabia are engaging in some kind of, a loggerhead, oil price war, which is also putting a lot of downward pressure on the price. Okay, but the most significant impact on that price is the COVID, situation where economies actually went into, induced coma. Things were not working anywhere. So that's a major impact. Of course, there are other factors that have medium to long-term impact on this oil price, including the fact that many global airlines are beginning to look at more efficient, wide-body, less fuel efficient, more fuel efficient, aircrafts. So they're going to be replacing a lot of their aircraft, soon to, reduce their fuel consumption. And the innovations around electric motors, electric vehicles, alternative energy, climate change concerns, and all of that are all portending or projecting, lower price for oil over the long term. Of course, don't forget that Saudi Arabia envisaged that, and you saw the highest divestment, you could see in an oil company, one of the biggest, if not the biggest oil company around the world, Aramco, Saudi Aramco, divested partially, some months ago, showing you that the desire to hold on oil assets is no more that strong, because everywhere around the world, oil is being seen as not something to hold on to in the medium to long term.
So can we look at it this way, that perhaps the federal government is trying to look at it like, okay,
I think they took
life without oil.
The worst case scenario is what they assumed. No, we are not yet thinking as a country, in terms of life without oil. We are not in any way. And I'm going to come to that in a short while. We're still behaving as though oil means everything to our country. You cannot see any structural framework in place to divert this economy away from oil dependence. The Dutch disease is still so deep. In fact, we're almost getting to the point of coma in our Dutch disease situation, despite the fact that every evidence is showing that no sane country can rely on its oil asset, for the future of that country. Nigeria has not taken any step in that. And that's an issue of risk management. We are a country badly managed when it comes to risk management. Oil has remained a mainstay in the economy. And every time there's an oil price crash or shock, every time, Nigeria always goes into deep recession. We have balance of payment crisis. We have insufficient revenue to fund our budget because, technically, oil revenue constitutes more than 60 to 70% of our budget revenue. Yes, theoretically, it's 50% in terms of oil price sales. But when you look at other activities that come off oil and associated, business activities, you find that if you build in the VAT, the tax, and all of that, oil revenue actually accounts for more than 60 to 70% of our budget. And despite the fact that oil price crash always puts us in a deep hole, in a big problem, over the years we have not learned to, hedge again, to manage this risk. Just a few years back in 2016, we went into a deep recession, which we're still struggling to come out of before COVID came. Already Nigeria was, the poverty capital of the world. With a very fragile economic growth rate that was, we were pushing to see how we could, ramp it up. And then suddenly COVID came, and now we're being, IMF has projected that our economy might, contract to as much as 3.4%. Many other analysts are saying even as much as 8% in view of the COVID. So our economy needs to be rescued from this horrible dependence on oil. And there are things we can clearly do about it. If time allows us, I can give solutions.
Now, is there
my views on that.
Is there a possibility that we can actually, base our budget only on non-oil revenue?
The way our economy is right now, the answer to your question is a total no. When you look at Nigeria's budget in the past years, the current government took a very bold step in moving our budget to close to 10 trillion. In fact, if not for this thing happening, we intended to spend about 10.5 trillion in 2020. Now, when you dimension that budget, you find that the revenue estimate is usually around 7 to 8 trillion every year, while we have about 1 point something or 2 trillion, deficit financing. But in real times, if you look at the real or actual revenue we have, most people look at the budget when it's being proposed. Not many of us bother to look at it at the end of the year, what actually happened.
Yeah.
I've taken time to look at that, and what you find is quite disheartening. You find that at the end of every budget calendar, Nigeria is not able to do more than 5 trillion naira in actual revenue generation. And when you look at that, like I said, oil revenue that will come from NNPC and all those activities, give us usually about 2.5 trillion. And the rest, when you look at the other part of it that comes from tax and other sources, you find that a lot of oil activities are also accounted in it. So when you remove oil from our annual budget plan, you find that we cannot raise, no matter how we try, as things are now, we can't raise up to 3 trillion naira. And for a country that has, going to be the biggest economy in Africa with 200 million people, can you actually spend 3 trillion to make this, can it make any impact in this economy? We always budget 10 trillion, but at the end of the day, what's our capacity to raise revenue? And that's where we have our issues, with this overdependence on oil. And mind you, the oil and gas sector constitutes only 9% of our whole GDP by composition. I'm looking at efficiency now and how horrible this country is run. A sector that gives you 9% of your total GDP composition is holding you down, is so critical that without it, you cannot function. Does that show efficiency and proper or optimal running of an economy? So the remaining 91% or so of the economy are just lying on the floor. They are lame. They are inactive, inefficient. They can't contribute to our foreign exchange earnings nor to fund our budget. That's a very serious, a dire situation that must be looked at urgently.
Okay. Now there's a revenue constraint. How drastic should the reduction in the budget be?
When you have this kind of constraint, the issue is not just to reduce your budget, because some expenses must still run, no matter how you want to reduce. It's not a wishful thing. It's not something you wish, revenue has gone away, so let's reduce. So there's some basic budget you must still handle. You must pay your debts. And currently, our debt service to GDP, to revenue ratio is trending towards 70%. For example, to explain that to a common person, It means that if we earn 100 naira in Nigeria today, we spend close to 70 naira servicing our debts, short-term, long-term debts. Are you alive, really? You have that kind of situation. That's why, of course, the Honorable Minister of Finance has just said that we are beginning to apply it to some of our lenders. I haven't seen the details, whether it includes multilateral lenders, bilateral lenders, those countries that we're owing, and even commercial lenders, the one we're going for to negotiate payment terms, restructuring,
and perhaps
or rescheduling,
relief,
or postponing, whatever they called it. And mind you, you could do that, but it's a clear sign that you are becoming a defaulter, that you're becoming a high-risk nation. And that will have a lot of consequences I cannot begin to discuss right now. Of course, our bonds will begin to be, looked away, by investors. And the country's risk profile is getting worse and worse by the time we do that. But we have no other choice. So this debt payment is always there in the budget. So when you talk about reducing your budget, you must pay your debts, particularly if they're commercial debts and bilateral debts. And then again, you must do some basic recurrent expenditure. That's a major issue for this country. While we grapple with all these challenges, this country has not sat down. The National Assembly, the Secret Senators and the House of Rep members, this is a time to sit down and look at some tough decisions. How do we scale down the size of our government? The political appointments, the government structure, do we need a bicameral system of government? And all the aides and aides to aides, SAs to SA, special assistants that we have both at state level, federal level, can we cut them off? All the duplication that we have in this economy, we have several agencies that do similar. We have more than 700 or 600 agencies in this country. And when you look at some of them critically, they do almost the same thing.
Okay, we just
so
saw
all these weights must be cut away.
Yes, the IMF $3.4 billion facility to Nigeria. What's your take on that?
Well, it became only very necessary because, without such support now, Nigeria, is a country that is bound to break at this point. So we need such support urgently. And that
but we're still talking about, our debts.
I'm coming. The point is that even though you are owing, it's a shame that the debt we've accumulated over the years, we have nothing to show for them. Quite sadly, we are owing several amounts to multilateral, in fact, to the World Bank Group, because we have been shying away from IMF lending or borrowing, because IMF is a business, like a kind of institution. You can't borrow from them without being well behaved. They have conditions, both prior conditions, and you must meet before you can borrow. So Nigeria has actually been owing IMF nothing because we have not been able to play along with them in terms of looking at some important reforms that we must conduct before we can borrow from them. This one happened because it was just
necessary.
And it's not even normal IMF loan program. Otherwise, we couldn't meet the conditions. This is just, what they call their rapid financing, instrument, the RFI, where, all the member countries, about 189 of them, could leverage their contribution in IMF to draw some of their right, what they call the special drawing rights. You've contributed, let's say, 1,000 SDR. And it amounts to, let's say, $2 billion. In a time of crisis, there are conditions for drawing on it anyway. When you have a crisis situation like we have right now with the COVID pandemic, or maybe you have a very urgent, serious balance of payment, crisis, you could call on IMF to allow you to draw on your right. And when you do such drawings, it's still a loan. You pay.
This is for 1%.
It's a loan that we're paying around 1%,
1%,
per annum, and we're going to pay in about 5 years from the IMF website where they explain the terms. 5 years, but payment may start on the 3rd year, meaning that there's about 2 years of moratorium. So, but it's a loan given to us. So we can't brag that, it's our right. Yeah, you have the framework, allows you to draw up to 100%, 50 to 100% of your contribution, and that we've just done. Yes, there's no strong, usual IMF conditionalities to this drawing. And that's why it was easier to come by anyway. If you were to take normal, because as it is, Nigeria has, has been estimated to lose more than $26 billion in oil revenue as a result of this COVID. And $3.4 billion is just a scratch to fill the gap we have, even in our budget. So the IMF is an intervention that was necessary, and that was even the biggest approval they had done as at the time they did it. And they did it because it was necessary, and we met the conditions to allow us to use the RFI a window. So, and even though there's some what do you call transparency and governance issues that are required, that's why they said They will have to
They will
monitor,
have to monitor,
the way
yeah.
CBN and Ministry of Finance apply those funds to ensure that it goes into the sector of the economy where they're intended. So, but they're not going to be on our neck so much to monitor how we use it. But it's part of the framework that we must use it, efficiently well.
So
but,
what do you think would be the implication of this for the foreign exchange market, particularly when the IMF is talking about unified and a flexible exchange rate, which currently we really don't have?
There's always this suspicion we've had in this country over the decades that whenever IMF tells us something that is not for our own good, and therefore we keep struggling with the decisions. But let me say here that International Monetary Fund works with about 189 countries, and they have the benefit of a global look at things. They know different countries. They know. Yes, they also don't understand some cultural, social, peculiarities of different nations. But chances are that when they tell you something that will help your economy, they're seeing the big picture more than you can say it. Now, when we have this kind of situation, as it just dawns on us, Nigeria is not able to receive enough dollars in their export because 90% of our export basket is oil. And in this kind of situation, we don't receive enough to enable us make our payments for imports and debt service. And we become broke as a nation. We become stifled of liquidity, foreign exchange liquidity. And in that situation, the only thing that can happen is that your currency must devalue. Today, Naira, window yesterday went to as high as 386 Naira per dollar. In the actual market, because I actually changed some dollars, a day or two ago, it's about 420, in fact, 430, thereabouts. Yeah. So, what you keep seeing is that you don't want to do the disciplined and tough thing. You will keep struggling, and your currency will keep devaluing. Let me make this point clearly. I've always, even on this platform, talked about Nigeria having to, unify its, stop its price control. CBN, in the report I read, over 15-month period ending December 2019, spent almost $43 billion dollars supporting the market. Now, in trying to bring this to limelight, we had similar problem with Egypt. We need this to be able to be clear what we are doing in this situation. Egypt was giving a proposal to unify their price and remove the control and float their currency. In 2016, it was a hard decision before they could access about 12 billion IMF loan, and they took the decision. It spiked their inflation to 33%, but now they are below 10%. Nigeria did not do that because we want to defend our currency, and we're still struggling till today. Egypt is now the highest decision for foreign direct investment in Africa. And Nigeria, we failed to do the difficult thing that will put our economy on a good footing looking forward, but we always take the easy path,
well, let's just hope we'll get it right eventually. Thank you, Mr. Udemeze.
Well, we pray so. Thanks a lot.
Udemeze is the CEO of Flame Academy and Consulting. We'll take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll beam our spotlight on the Nigerian Stock Exchange. Do stay with us.